And it's because these letters are such a strong expression of who we are. It's a part of our ego that's contained in the letters of our name. White lawyers who were born in that particular country. And so you find the same effect even there, that the white lawyers with white names that were easier to pronounce tended to do a little bit better. And for those religious people, seeing that symbol kind of clicked something for them, and they became much more honest. So in general, they might have had an honesty level of 50%, but you show them that symbol even subtly in the environment around them, and suddenly they become much more honest.
That was your first book, Drunk Tank Pink. You say how our names have a huge bearing on our outcomes across various facets of our life.
Yeah.
It's quite shocking to me, because our name is something that we don't choose, and it seems to be so simple and slightly irrelevant.
Yeah. It's true. I mean, there are lots of different ways names influence us. One of these little demonstrations that I do when I give talks on this subject is I'll present the letters of the Roman alphabet, the 26 letters that we understand to be the letters in the English language. And I'll ask people to think about their 3 favorite letters. And then I say, now put your hand up in the room if one of those at least was the first letter of your first name, middle name, or last name. And almost every hand goes up. So these are letters. Who has preferences for letters? It's a bizarre thing to have to answer, but we do. And it's because these letters are such a strong expression of who we are. It's a part of our ego that's contained in the letters of our name. And so even that alone shows the power of names over us, that they are such a strong reflection of who we are and our identity. So that's the first thing. And you find interesting effects from this, actually. If you look at the hurricanes that we name in the US, or that you name around the world in other places, you get much more donation aid if the hurricane name matches your initial. So they found that when Hurricane Katrina came through and devastated New Orleans, people whose names began with a K donated way more than people whose names didn't begin with a K. The same for a whole lot of other hurricanes with other initials. The other big thing is the ease with which people can pronounce your name. So that seems to have a really big effect on all sorts of outcomes. If people can pronounce your name, there's this kind of sense of familiarity. If that's the breaking of the ice happens over that first pronunciation of your name, obviously the easier it is to say the name, the less anxiety you have about it. I guess the more smoothly that breaking of the ice goes. And there's a lot of evidence from some of my own research. We looked, for example, at how quickly people rise up through law firm hierarchies. How quickly do they become partners? And there's a period in the middle of careers, in like about the 10th to the 20th year of a career for a lawyer, where there's a premium. You are much more likely to become a partner, several % more likely to become a partner earlier if your name is pronounceable. And I think what's happening there is, if I'm a partner at a firm and there are a whole lot of young associates and I'm trying to put together a team, if there's someone with a name that's easy to pronounce and someone whose name I'm anxious about pronouncing, I don't know how to pronounce it, I will default to the one who's easy to pronounce. I'm not trying to be rude about it, but in that moment, it just seems easier. It's the path of least resistance. And that's how humans act much of the time.
Is there not an element of discrimination and prejudice associated with that? Because I think if a name was easier to pronounce, it's probably familiar. It's therefore probably culturally popular. They're probably like me, like a Jack or like a Stephen. But if it's a name that I've not seen, trying to figure out causality here, it could be because they're foreign. My mother, I always think about this. My mother's from Nigeria, and she could have given me a traditional Nigerian name,
right? But
she called me Stephen. And I think, I was also born in Botswana in Africa. I think had she called me something else, my life probably would have been quite different, in all honesty. I worked for 4 years on phones doing like telesales.
Yeah.
And when you call up and your name is Stephen in the UK and you sound like I do,
yeah,
I think any prejudice someone might have had because of the color of my skin or where I'm from vanishes. Is there any evidence to support that?
Yeah, so there are two things. One thing is absolutely the prejudice that goes along with having a foreign sounding name. And there's evidence, for example, in the United States, there's a study where thousands of CVs were mailed out and applications for jobs, either with a traditionally white name or a traditionally black name, as we think of them in the United States based on the demographic naming trends. And especially for the ones that were kind of in the middle of the pack, not especially strong and not especially weak, there's a huge premium to having the traditionally white name. So there's a lot of prejudice that goes on with naming. But also in the studies we did, we wanted to parcel out this specific effect of fluency, of how easy it was to pronounce. So we restricted our analysis in the one case to just white lawyers who were born in that particular country. And so you find the same effect even there, that the white lawyers with white names that were easier to pronounce tended to do a little bit better. But you're right, I think a huge part of it is prejudice and discrimination.
When you wrote about symbols in your first book, what were some of the most sort of surprising things in terms of how powerful and inspirational they are to us without us even knowing?
Well, as a marketing professor, I'm very, very interested in how symbols play a role in branding and in conveying ideas really succinctly. I think that the simplest way to convey an idea is with an image, and the images that are the most powerful are often in symbolic form. A lot of them are very negative images that we get from symbols. They're associated with ideals that we don't like, for example. Something like a swastika it's a terrible symbol the way it's used, or it has been used for the last almost 100 years now. But the amount of meaning that's conveyed in those symbols is tremendous. And so there's a sort of terrible power to symbols. They can shape behavior in all sorts of ways. One of the studies I did looked at people who were religious versus not religious, and then showed them a religious symbol and then asked them to do a behavior that was either going to be done honestly or dishonestly. We were essentially measuring whether they were going to behave honestly. And for those religious people, seeing that symbol kind of clicked something for them, and they became much more honest. So in general, they might have had an honesty level of 50%, but you show them that symbol even subtly in the environment around them, and suddenly they become much more honest. So these things are constantly swimming around us and gently nudging our behavior in different directions.
It almost reminded me a little bit of the thing you wrote about in that book, about how when people are shown a picture of eyeballs at like a free snack bar where they can take what they want, they're much more honest about their decisions. Because eyes, again, in a way, are a symbol.
Yeah.
They're a symbol of the tribe, maybe?
Yeah, of being watched, of feeling like you're being watched. There's some really interesting evidence from this, looking at using eyeballs to get people to behave better. So if you have an image of a pair of eyes looking at you, just disembodied, just the eyes, you don't see any of the rest of the face, you find that people behave much more honestly. They're much less likely to steal something. You see shoplifting rates go down. The best use of it, though, I think, is if you say you're a chocoholic, you love chocolate, but you don't want to be eating it, but you also want to have a little bit around every now and again. One thing you can do is you can have a little cupboard in your kitchen where the inside of the cupboard you put a mirror. And that's where the chocolate lives. So you open it up, and every time you reach for the chocolate, you have to stare into your own soul. And so the eyeballs, whether they're yours or somebody else's, just having to look at yourself, not just metaphorically, but literally as you do something, it brings out your better angels. And there's a lot of evidence for that in various psychological studies.